Hello and welcome to Insomniac Dose. You're welcome to comment your city and the time below. I always enjoy reading them. If you find these stories interesting, please consider subscribing. Let's start tonight's story. The door to the lower section stood open like a mouth that had finally decided to stop pretending it was sealed. I didn't hear the padlock hit the floor. I only saw it later, lying there intact, metal unbroken as if someone with careful hands had placed it down and stepped away. The chain was coiled beside it, neat as a stored rope. The water level gauge on the frame, the one Bryce swore by, read 0. Behind me, the motion sensor lights flickered, then went out in sequence, chasing my shadow down the corridor as if darkness had learned to follow. From below the stairs, from the part of the tunnel that had been flooded for 18 months, a voice spoke with the calm patience of someone reading a familiar script. "Lena Marsh," it said, full name, clean consonants. "You can hear me." My throat locked. I pressed the radio to my chest anyway, feeling its dead weight. The air smelled wrong down here, not just mineral water and concrete, but something like wet pennies and old breath. The open doorway exhaled cold. The voice continued, closer without moving. "Say you can hear me." I did what the rules never prepared me for. I stepped into the dark and shut off the lights myself. The last thing I saw before everything went black was my own badge swinging against my jacket, my name gleaming in reflective plastic like bait. 48 hours earlier, I took the Wayland tunnel job because it paid above market rate and because the alternative was my sister's couch. The couch wasn't just a couch, it was proximity. It was her kitchen and her careful silence and the way she washed the same mug twice, as if the first wash had been a rehearsal. Yet it was the staircase in her building, the one I still pictured when I tried to sleep. 12 steps, a tight turn, a landing that narrowed at the top. Geometry you could memorize without meaning to. The official story was that Dean fell. I was there. I had been 2 steps above him. I knew the angle his body took when it hit, the way the railing flexed, the placement of my hands in the moment before. Palms out, fingers spread, as if I'd been bracing myself against him or against the idea of him. I had told it enough times to the police, to my sister, to my own therapist in a room that smelled like eucalyptus and printer toner, that the story began to sound like something I'd heard rather than something I'd done. The tunnel job was simple on paper, and the Wayland tunnel ran under the old industrial waterfront, a pedestrian and utility passage that used to connect 2 districts back when people still pretended they liked walking through concrete arteries beneath river level. 18 months ago, a partial flooding event closed it to the public. The lower section never fully drained. Now the city had contracted a private firm, my firm, to monitor it during decommissioning. That phrase meant nothing specific. It was a way of saying, we don't want to deal with what's down there, but we want someone else to be legally adjacent to it. My assignment per the onboarding packet was routine. Clock in at the upper entrance at 2300. Walk the dry upper section on a 4-hour rotation. Log pressure readings from monitoring stations spaced along the corridor. Report unusual activity to a listed emergency number. The emergency number rang twice and went to voicemail every time I tried it during orientation. I left a test message. No one called back. The voicemail greeting didn't identify a company, just a man's voice saying, "Leave it." When I arrived on my first night, the entrance was a concrete alcove tucked behind a chain-link fence and a "No Trespassing/City Infrastructure" sign that had been sun-bleached into a suggestion. My badge opened the reader with a dull beep. The air inside hit me like cold breath. The tunnel smelled of mineral water and old concrete. Not sewage, not rot, something cleaner and older. The kind of smell you get in basements that have been damp for decades and had given up on trying to be dry. The uplighting lights were on motion sensors, and they woke in segments as I moved. each pool of fluorescent light buzzing into existence a few meters ahead, then dying behind me. The effect was economical and, in a way I couldn't have articulated then, mildly insulting. Like the tunnel only agreed to acknowledge me as long as I kept walking. A laminated rules sheet was mounted beside the entrance badge reader. The plastic was scuffed, corners rounded from repeated wiping. I read it in about 30 seconds. Posted rules. Valen Tunnel, upper section. Authorized personnel only. No unauthorized entry. Do not enter the lower flooded section under any circumstances. Maintain rotation schedule. Do not deviate from the marked route. Log readings at each monitoring station. Do not falsify entries. I do not respond verbally to sounds originating from the lower access door or below monitoring station 4. Report anomalies immediately to the on-call number. Under no circumstances acknowledge that you can hear it speaking. Rule 7 read like a typo, a sentence from a different sign accidentally laminated onto this one. It had that bureaucratic rhythm, under no circumstances, but the pronoun was wrong, it, unspecified, casual, like everyone already knew. I told myself it was a joke, or a legal relic from some old training scenario. I'd worked security in a hospital once, and I'd heard stranger things in break rooms from nurses who had been awake too long. Stories about dead patients ringing call bells, about elevators that stopped on floors that didn't exist. People did that. They made rituals out of exhaustion, and the tunnel had its own physical boundary. A lower access door about a third of the way along my route. It was a heavy metal door set into the right wall, painted industrial gray. A chain and padlock secured it. The chain looked newer than everything else down here. Bright metal against stained concrete, as if someone had come in and tried to impose order recently. A small gauge like a water level indicator was mounted beside the frame. It had a red line painted across it and a clear plastic window with a floating marker. The marker sat below the red line. Nothing alarming. I did my first rotation in 90 minutes, slow enough to log the numbers and note the condition of each station. There were 4 stations in the upper section, each with a metal box, a pressure readout, and a clipboard for paper logs no one ever collected. And the numbers were steady. The tunnel was quiet except for the faint, constant drip of water somewhere below, and the distant hum of the city above, traffic translated into vibration through concrete. At 3 o'clock, I sat at the small folding desk near the entrance and filled out the digital log on my phone. The interface was dated, clunky, and designed for liability rather than use. Under notable events, I typed none. When I drove home at dawn, the sky over the waterfront was a bruised gray. The city looked newly built in that light, fresh, innocent, as if nothing could be buried under it. I slept for 3 hours. In the middle of the day, I woke with the sensation of my name being spoken in the next room, and for a full minute I didn't move, because moving would mean confirming I'd heard it. And that was the first time I remembered Rule 7 without reading it. By the 3rd night, I had a rhythm. There was comfort in routine in the way my footsteps woke the lights in predictable intervals. Comfort in the pressure readings that barely fluctuated. Comfort even in the lower access door staying shut, its chain still bright, its padlock reflecting my flashlight beam. I'd started treating the rules sheet as background noise. I could recite the first 6 without effort. The 7th remained in the category of odd phrasing, like a poorly translated warning label. The first knock happened at monitoring station 4. Station 4 was the farthest point of my rotation, near the sealed end of the upper tunnel where a metal barrier blocked further passage. The air was colder there. The concrete had a darker sheen, as if it held moisture closer to the surface. The motion sensor lights took longer to activate in that section. Sometimes I'd take a step into grayness before the fluorescent strip above me buzzed alive. That night, As I stood at Station 4 with my flashlight angled toward the pressure readout, I heard knocking from the direction of the lower access door. Not loud, not urgent. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 knocks again. It sounded like someone tapping on a pipe with a wrench. I looked down the corridor. The tunnel was empty. The lights behind me had already shut off, leaving a long stretch of darkness in the direction I'd come from. Ahead of me was only the barrier and damp concrete. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Rule 5 surfaced in my head like an advertisement. Do not respond verbally to sounds originating from the lower access door. I did what I would have done anywhere else. I logged it. In the notable events section, I typed, knocking sound audible during Station 4 reading, possible acoustic reverberation pressure shift. Then I kept walking. On the 4th night, the knocking changed. I was approaching Station 4 when I heard it, irregular, too fast, then too slow, then stopping altogether. I paused. The knocking paused. I took another step. The knocking resumed, then settled into a pattern that matched my footfalls within 2 or 3 beats. It wasn't mimicry like a parrot. It was delayed, as if something on the other side needed a moment to interpret the rhythm and then decide to answer it. I stopped walking. The tunnel went silent. I stood there with my flashlight beam trained down the corridor, waiting for the next knock, the way you wait for your phone to buzz after you've sent a risky text. I told myself it was water pressure. I told myself pipes carried sound D, and I was assigning intention because humans did that to fill empty spaces. 90 seconds passed. My phone clock ticked. The motion sensor lights behind me clicked off, plunging more of the tunnel into darkness. My breathing felt loud. At exactly 90 seconds, the moment I shifted my weight, the moment my boot soles squeaked faintly against damp concrete, the knocking resumed. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. It had been waiting for confirmation that I was still there. I finished my rotation faster than usual, not running, just efficient. At the desk, I called the on-call number and listened to it ring twice and go to voicemail. I left a message. I'm reporting an acoustic anomaly at Station 4. Knocking sounds appear responsive to movement. No visual contact. No other issues. I didn't leave my name. There was no prompt. The voicemail didn't ask for identifying information. It just said, leave it. I drove home with the radio on. Talk radio. People arguing about city council budgets. Ordinary noise as a sedative. The call came back the next evening while I was parking. My phone rang with an unknown number. For a second, I considered not answering. Self-preservation disguised as politeness. Then I answered because I was still, at that point, a person who believed systems worked if you used them correctly. A man's voice, calm and brief. That's within normal parameters. I do not respond to it. Continue your rotation. Who is this? I asked. He hung up. I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over redial, and felt something old and small in my chest tighten. The sensation of being dismissed by authority. My sister's boyfriend had done that too, dismissing with a laugh, with a shrug, until the moment the stairs took him or me. I walked into the tunnel that night with the rules sheet freshly in my mind. At the entrance, under the flickering fluorescent light, Rule 7 seemed different from what it had before. Not a joke, not a typo. A line written by someone who had learned the hard way that acknowledgement was a form of permission. Under no circumstances acknowledge that you can hear it speaking. It wasn't speaking, I told myself. It was knocking, and I was not acknowledging anything. That was, in hindsight, my first act of compliance. Bryce started covering Saturday nights in my second week. He was my weekend supervisor in the loosest possible sense. A man with a company jacket and a clipboard who appeared at the tunnel entrance at 22:45, drank coffee from a thermos, and gave off the bored confidence of someone who had survived long enough to mistake survival for mastery. He was mid-30s, broad-shouldered, with a sunburn that never fully faded, and the kind of tired eyes you saw in people who worked nights by choice rather than necessity. He called me Marsh, after glancing at my badge once like we were in the military. "You'll hear stuff," he said on our first overlap. "Ignore it." "That's in the posted rules," I said. He snorted. "Posted rules are liability language, and what you want is the real list." He pulled a note card from his shirt pocket. It was folded and creased, handled enough to soften the paper. He didn't hand it to me. He held it close to his chest like a priest protecting scripture. "I've been here 11 months, he said. "I've seen the city inspectors, the contractors, the creeps who try to break in. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is that gauge." He nodded toward the lower access door. "The water level?" I asked. "Yeah. If it reads above the line, don't go near it for any reason. If it reads below, it's fine. People get spooked because they think the door's the problem. It's not. The water is." "That's not in the official rules." Bryce smiled like I'd said something naive and charming. "Official rules don't keep you alive." I didn't like that phrasing, and I also didn't know enough to refute it. That Saturday, the gauge marker sat below the red line. Bryce looked satisfied, like the tunnel had passed a test. During our shift overlap, he did something I hadn't seen anyone do. He walked down the lower access stairs, not through the door. The door was chained shut, but there was a short stairwell leading down to a landing in front of it, a small concrete platform where you could stand and presumably listen. "I just want to check something," he said. "What?" I asked. "Been bothering me," he said, already descending. His flashlight beam swept downward, illuminating wet concrete steps. The air changed near the stairwell, colder, heavier, carrying the stronger smell of water. I stayed at the top because Rule 2 had been clear about the lower flooded section, and because even Bryce's private note card rules hadn't told me to follow. He was gone for 6 minutes. I know the exact number because I watched my phone clock like it was a countdown. The tunnel was quiet. No knocking, no movement. The lights stayed on because I was standing there, and the motion sensor in that segment kept acknowledging my presence. At 6 minutes, Bryce's flashlight beam reappeared, bobbing up the steps. He emerged wet from the waist down. Not damp, not splashed. Wet as if he had stood in shallow water. Water ran off his cargo pants in thin streams, darkening the concrete at his feet. "The flooding doesn't reach the landing," I said before I could stop myself. Bryce blinked at me like he hadn't expected me to speak. "What?" he said. "You're soaked." He looked down at himself, frowning. For a second, his expression held genuine confusion, an actor forgetting his lines. Then he laughed too loudly. "Condensation," he said. "It's humid down there. You stand in that stairwell long enough, it clings." I didn't argue because arguing required certainty, and certainty was something the tunnel was already eroding. After he walked away, I checked the gauge. The marker now sat above the red line. It had changed while Bryce was down there. I watched it for a full minute. It didn't move. It wasn't drifting. It was simply different. As if the act of his standing on the landing had altered what the tunnel was willing to admit about itself. Bryce called in sick the next 3 Saturdays. When he returned, he was thinner. His sunburn looked more like irritation. His eyes were duller, as if sleep had stopped restoring him. "Did you go down to the landing?" I asked during our overlap, careful to sound casual. He stared at me. "What landing?" "The stairwell. Last month." He shook his head slowly, like I was trying to trick him. "I don't go down there, that's basic. You don't go down there." "You did," I said, then regretted the insistence. Bryce's jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the note card. It wasn't the same. I didn't see the whole thing, just a glimpse as he unfolded it. There were more lines now, more cramped handwriting as if someone had added rules in a hurry. One instruction was crossed out with hard, angry strokes. The water level rule. In its place was something I couldn't fully read, but the last word was clear. Alone. Bryce noticed me looking and snapped the card shut. "Don't stare at it," he said. "Why?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He just looked past me into the tunnel as if listening for a sound he wasn't going to acknowledge. Later that night at Station 4, the knocking resumed. Soft, patient, responsive. And in the silence between knocks, I heard something else for the first time. A faint, almost human exhale like someone breathing against a door. I kept walking. I did not respond. But as I wrote my report, I realized a new problem had quietly arrived. If Bryce didn't remember going down there, either he was lying, or memory was another surface the tunnel could flood. Research was what I did when I needed to feel innocent. It was a habit from last spring. After Dean fell, I read about staircase accidents until my browser suggested ergonomic handrails and slip-resistant treads. I memorized statistics the way some people memorize prayers. In the Wron tunnel had an official paper trail. The city website described it in clean language, a mid-century pedestrian corridor currently under decommission due to structural compromise from routine flooding. Articles about the closure were brief, almost boring. No names, no drama, no sense that the tunnel mattered enough to haunt. But the preservation database, the one maintained by local historians and people who treated infrastructure like family history, had older records. The tunnel had been built in the 1940s as a dual-use passage, pedestrian and utility. It had a lower service corridor that ran parallel to the upper walkway. In 1961, a section had been sealed after a worker drowned. The sealed section corresponded exactly to the flooded lower area, and the preservation write-up included one line that didn't fit the tone of the rest. Access restricted following incident. Subsequent activity undocumented. It was the kind of sentence someone wrote when they'd been told not to write more. On my 6th night, I found the document bag by accident. Monitoring Station 2 was near a section of the ceiling where concrete panels met in a seam. The seam had a hairline crack, and when I angled my flashlight upward, I saw that one panel wasn't flush. It sagged by a few millimeters as if it had been removed and replaced. I shouldn't have touched it. Curiosity is a form of entry. But I had already started believing the tunnel kept information the way water kept bodies, hidden, preserved, waiting to be found by someone who couldn't resist. I stood on a bench and pressed my fingers into the seam. The panel lifted with surprising ease. Behind it was a small cavity, and tucked inside a waterproof document bag. The bag was a cloudy plastic with a sealable strip. Someone had wiped it clean recently. I brought it down, opened it, and pulled out its contents. Notes, loose papers, some folded, some torn from notebooks, at least 4 different handwritings. Dates that didn't form a neat sequence. The earliest note was barely legible, written in pencil so faint it looked like a shadow. H. Never stand still at Station 4 more than 30 seconds, it counts. Another, in thick marker, had a different energy, angry, impatient. If it knocks in rhythm, you already let it learn you. Don't test it, don't joke back, don't prove you're brave. A third note, unsigned, was just a list of times. 0014/0102/0230/0311. It changes at 0230, and that one made my stomach tighten. 230 was when the child voice would come later. At the time, it was just a number that looked too specific to be meaningless. The most recent note was dated 7 months ago. It was written on company incident report paper, the kind we used for documenting trespassers and broken locks. The handwriting was careful, as if the writer had been trying to be readable under stress. It was signed only. Previous Friday shift. The note read, "It learned my name from my badge. Cover your badge after midnight. Covering it doesn't help, but it slows it down." I stared at that line until my eyes watered. My badge had my full name on it. I had been wearing it uncovered for 3 weeks of midnight rotations. There was also a sheet of paper that looked like it had been photocopied repeatedly. The text was warped, faint in places. It resembled the posted rules sheet, but the order was different. One line stood out. "If you hear it speak, do not let it hear you swallow." It wasn't on the wall sign. It wasn't on Bryce's note card as far as I'd seen. It was a rule about a bodily function so small it seemed absurd, until you imagined silence thick enough that swallowing could be a signal. I resealed the bag and put it back behind the ceiling panel, then stopped. The act of returning it felt wrong, like hiding evidence. So I took it with me. At the desk near the entrance, under the harsh fluorescent light, I spread the notes out and photographed them. I didn't upload them. I didn't send them to anyone. Evidence is only evidence if you can survive long enough to show it. On my next rotation, I covered my badge after midnight with a strip of black tape. At 1:15, near the lower access door, I heard a soft sound, like someone reading quietly from a few feet away. I couldn't make out words. It was just cadence, the shape of speech without meaning. My throat tightened. I focused on my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, silent, controlled. At Station 4, the knocking began. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Then in the pause, the voice became clearer. Not loud, not dramatic, simply present, like a coworker speaking from behind a cubicle wall. "Lena," it said. I froze. Rule 7 bloomed in my mind, no longer abstract. Under no circumstances acknowledge that you can hear it speaking. My pulse hammered in my ears loud enough to feel like a reply. I didn't speak. I didn't turn my head. I walked, and as I walked away, the voice followed. Not in volume, but in accuracy, and as if it were adjusting to the shape of my fear. "Lena Marsh," it said, tasting the full name as it had always owned it. The call came on a night I hadn't left a voicemail. I was in my car in the fenced lot above the entrance, finishing a lukewarm coffee and staring at the tunnel door like it might change shape if I looked away. My badge was taped over, my phone was in my lap. Unknown number. I answered without thinking because fear makes you crave instruction. The same calm male voice spoke, but this time with a rehearsed urgency, as if he had limited time to be human. "You found the bag," he said. I sat upright so fast my seatbelt cut my shoulder. "Who are you?" "A former project manager on the original drainage contract," he said. "That's all you need. Listen carefully." "How do you—" "The flooding wasn't accidental," he cut in. The lower section was sealed in '61 because the worker who drowned did not stay drowned. What the city contracted now is not decommissioning, it's containment." His words landed with the weight of something I had almost been ready to believe. Not because I wanted ghosts, but because I wanted an explanation that made my own experiences less personal. If it was institutional, if the city knew, then I wasn't crazy, I was just employed. "What is it?" I asked. A pause, no hesitation, calculation. "We monitor behavior," he said. "Not water levels. The water is just a method, a medium. It slows it, it muffles, it confuses the boundaries." "Why me?" I asked the question that always rises first in, no matter how irrational it is. "Why me? Why now? Why my name?" "You're alone," he said. "That matters." "I'm not Bryce." "Bryce is compromised," the voice said flatly. "If he's talking to you, hang up. If he says your name, hang up." My fingers tightened around the phone. The man continued, speaking faster now, the rehearsed speech nearing its end. "The rules on the wall are accurate. They're sequenced wrong. The most important rule is the last one. Before I could respond, he added softer. And you need to stop writing reports like you're describing weather. What does that mean? It means it hears what you make official, he said. Good luck. The line went dead. I sat in the car listening to the absence of tone, the way a disconnected call has its own sound, flat, final. My heartbeat felt like an impact against my ribs, a fist trying to get out. Inside the tunnel, I walked straight to the laminated rules sheet and read it like a confession. Rule 1, fine. Rule 2, fine. Rule 3, fine. Rule 4, fine. Rule 5, fine. Rule 6, fine. Rule 7, under no circumstances acknowledge that you can hear it speaking. My mouth went dry. It had been speaking for at least 2 weeks. I had been logging the sounds as acoustic anomalies. I had been leaving voicemails. I had been, in a way that now felt grotesquely intimate, describing it, giving it shape in bureaucratic language, creating a record, making it part of the tunnel's accepted behavior. I thought of Dean, of the way my sister's voice had changed when she told the story to her parents. Softer, simplified, sanitized. The way repetition turns an event into a script, and the script becomes more real than the moment. The tunnel had rules. In the tunnel also had paperwork. I started my rotation. At monitoring station 1, the pressure readout was steady. I wrote the numbers by hand instead of typing them into the phone app. The paper log felt safer, less transmissible. Ridiculous logic, but by then logic was mostly what I used to manage panic. At station 2, I kept my eyes forward. I didn't look at the ceiling panel where the bag had been. I felt, irrationally, that looking would be a form of acknowledgement. At station 3, I heard water dripping in a pattern that resembled counting. Not in a clean rhythm, but close enough that my brain tried to impose numbers. At station 4, the lights buzzed on late, flickering as if struggling to decide whether I had earned illumination. I stood in front of the monitoring box and forced myself to keep moving, and the note from H echoed in my mind. Never stand still at station 4 for more than 30 seconds. It counts. Counts toward what? Toward permission? Toward its attention? Toward some invisible threshold like a punch card of fear? The knocking began behind me, nearer now, and the voice spoke. Not from the door, not from below, but from the concrete itself, as if the tunnel had developed a mouth. Lena, it said. I didn't turn. Lena Marsh, it said, closer in tone rather than in volume. You can hear me. I felt saliva gather in my mouth. The photocopied rule floated up. If you hear it speak, do not let it hear you swallow. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth and breathed through my nose. The muscles in my throat trembled with the effort of stillness. I wrote the pressure number down, handshaking, and moved. The voice continued, patient, almost gentle. It's rude to ignore someone who knows you. The worst part was how reasonable it sounded, not monstrous, not demonic. Just offended, like a person denied basic courtesy. I reached the desk near the entrance and sat down hard, legs suddenly weak. I didn't call the on-call number. I didn't open the reporting app. I wrote one sentence in my personal notebook instead, the one I kept hidden under the desk drawer. It knows my name. Even as I wrote it, I felt a flicker of dread. Writing was also acknowledgement. But I couldn't stop documenting. Documentation was the only way I knew to keep reality from sliding. That night when I drove home, I checked my rearview mirror 3 times on the highway. Not because I expected to see something, because I expected to see myself and for a second not recognize her. 2:30 arrived like an appointment. By the time I had adjusted my behavior around the rules the way you adjust around an old injury, careful movements, small accommodations, pretending the limitation is a choice. I covered my badge after midnight, but I could feel the outline of my name through the tape like a bruise. I didn't stand still at Station 4. I didn't speak in the tunnel at all, not even to myself. When I coughed, I bit the inside of my cheek to force it quiet. I stopped leaving voicemails. I stopped typing anomaly into anything that might be saved on a server. I reduced my logs to numbers only, pressure readings, timestamps, no description. The tunnel in response became more conversational. Not louder, not more aggressive, more adaptive, and it learned the small sounds I made without thinking. The click of my tongue against my teeth when I concentrated, the shallow inhale when I turned a corner. It matched my pace with subtle changes in the environment. The way the lights came on a fraction late, the way the drip pattern shifted. It was as if I were practicing my habits. On Tuesday night at 2:30, I heard a child's voice from behind the lower access door. Clear, close, frightened. "Hello?" the girl said. "Please, can you open it? I'm cold." My hand tightened on my flashlight until my knuckles hurt. The voice sounded like it came from the other side of the door, right up against the metal. Not muffled by water, not distorted by distance. Human proximity. "I've been down here a long time," she said, voice trembling in a way that felt authentic. Please don't leave me." I stood in front of the door. The chain and padlock were still in place. The gauge marker sat just below the red line. Bryce would have said it was fine. Rule 2 said, "Do not enter the lower flooded section under any circumstances." The note said, "It learned my name from my badge. It changes at 2:30. Never stand still at Station 4. The man on the phone said, "We monitor behavior, not water levels." And my own history, the staircase, Dean's falling body, my sister's grief, pressed against me like a hand between my shoulder blades, because I knew what it sounded like when someone was genuinely frightened. Last spring, after Dean fell, my sister had made a sound I'd never heard from her before, animal, involuntary, a sound without words, pure fear and loss, too raw to perform. And the child's voice behind the lower access door was almost perfect. Too perfect. There was no breath between phrases, no shift in tone from fatigue, no saliva click, no throat clearing. The fear was consistent, sustained at the same pitch as if controlled by a dial. It was fear rendered by intelligence. "Please," it said, "I can hear you. I know you're there." My stomach twisted. My hand rose without permission and rested on the chain. Cold metal, dry. The padlock was warm from the air, not from use. The voice continued. "My name is..." I cut that off in my mind like slamming a book shut. Names were currency in this tunnel. The notes had made that clear. I imagined opening the door, not because I believed a child was there, but because I could picture myself doing it anyway. Trying to redeem something I couldn't fix. And that was the danger. Not gullibility, but guilt. Dean's face flashed in my memory, not in the moment he fell, but in the moment before. Smirking, dismissive, leaning too close to my sister, calling her dramatic. My hands raised, the geometry of the staircase. If I opened this door, I told myself, it wouldn't be mercy, it would be repetition. Another choice was made because I wanted to feel like a good person. The child's voice softened. "It's so dark down here." My throat clenched hard enough to hurt. Tears prickled behind my eyes, not because I believed her, but because the performance was good enough to reach into something real in me. I removed my hand from the chain. I stepped away from the door. I walked back toward Station 4 without looking back. The voice followed me. Not through volume, through accuracy. "Lena," it said, imitating the way my sister used to say my name when she wanted something. "Lena, don't do this." I kept walking. My footsteps echoed. The lights blinked on ahead of me, then off behind, like the tunnel was blinking, opening and closing an eye. "Please," the voice said, now closer in tone. "Please don't leave me as you left him." My knees went weak. It didn't know Dean's name, I realized. It didn't need it. It had found the shape of my guilt without details, like fingers finding a scar through fabric. For the remaining 90 minutes of my shift, I talked. It tried different voices. Child, woman, man, my sister's cadence, Dean's laugh. It adjusted when a voice failed to make my breathing change. It tried kindness, it tried anger, it tried weary familiarity, and between each attempt it listened. And it listened to the smallest involuntary sound I made, an inhale, a tremor, the shift of my boot on concrete, then used that information to refine the next line. By 4 o'clock it had reached something that felt like true cruelty. Not because it was loud, but because it was precise. Say you can hear me, it said gently, like offering help. Just say it, then you can stop pretending. I didn't speak, but the tunnel had already learned something important. I was capable of standing at a door and not opening it, even when it sounded like someone was dying. That restraint, I think now, was the point of no return, because it wasn't testing my compassion. It was testing my thresholds. When I arrived the next night, the air at the entrance tasted metallic. Not blood, nothing that obvious, but a tang like wet pennies, like old pipes. On the fluorescent light above the badge reader flickered twice before stabilizing. I checked the rules sheet without thinking, as if reading it again could alter its outcome. The words stayed the same. The last rule still used that casual pronoun, it, like a name everyone shared. I taped over my badge at 23:59. At 0:10, I reached the lower access door. It was open, not cracked, not forced. Open as if it had been unlocked by someone who cared about hinges. The padlock lay on the floor intact, no scratches. The chain was coiled beside it in a neat circle. The water level gauge read 0. For a moment, my brain refused to accept the visual. The door had been chained for weeks. It had been the tunnel's main boundary, the physical manifestation of Rule 2. Seeing it open felt like seeing a familiar person with their face rearranged. I stepped closer. Cold air rolled out from the stairwell below, carrying the stronger water smell and something else, stale breath, old damp fabric, a hint of sweetness like decay without rot. The darkness beyond the door didn't look like the absence of light. It looked like substance. I pulled my phone out and called the on-call number. No ring. Disconnected tone. I called again. Same. My hands started to shake in a way I couldn't control. Don't panic yet. Adrenaline is trying to decide where to go. I called Bryce. He answered immediately, which he never did. Lena Marsh, he said as soon as I connected. Full name, Crisp. I hung up. My throat burned as if I'd swallowed something sharp. The old project manager's instruction echoed. If he says your name, hang up. The rules gave me nothing for this scenario, and there was no laminated instruction for if the sealed door is open and the water is gone. I stood at the top of the lower stairwell and listened. No knocking, no child voice, just the steady drip of water somewhere below, closer now, and a faint sound that might have been breathing or might have been my own blood moving. I backed away from the open door and forced myself into procedure. The procedure was armor. I walked my rotation. Station 1, pressure steady. Station 2, steady. Station 3, steady. At Station 4, the lights took a full 5 seconds to activate. I stood in grayness, waiting, and felt the tunnel's attention like a hand hovering inches from my skin. The note from the bag surfaced, one I'd dismissed before. It follows light before it follows sound. At the time, I'd thought it was metaphorical, under the way people in fear describe patterns they can't prove. Standing there now, watching the lights hesitate as if uncertain whether to help me, I believed it literally. Light was a path. Light was permission. If it followed light, then the motion sensors were not just cost-saving measures. They were guidance systems. I turned and walked back toward the entrance, keeping my steps measured. My mind worked in clinical fragments: breaker box location, distance, time. The breaker box was mounted behind a maintenance panel near the desk. I'd seen it during orientation and forgotten it because no one had mentioned it in training. It wasn't in any rule set. That was why it mattered. I reached the desk, opened the panel, and flipped the master switch. The tunnel lights shut off. All of them. Darkness rushed in, thick and immediate. My flashlight beam became the only defined shape in the corridor. A narrow cone of white that made the rest of the tunnel feel endless. My own breathing sounded louder now, amplified by concrete. I stood still and listened, then remembered H's note, "Never stand still at Station 4, and realized the tunnel's rules didn't always align. Standing still could be dangerous in one place, and moving could be dangerous in another. The rules weren't commandments. They were experiments recorded by people who survived long enough to write. I turned my flashlight off. The dark became complete. In that darkness, I could feel the tunnel differently. Pressure changes, temperature gradients, dampness on my skin. The air was colder near the lower access door, warmer near the entrance. I oriented myself by smell, by the subtle echo of my boots. I started walking toward the exit by memory. I didn't count steps aloud. I counted heartbeats. The monitoring stations became landmarks in my mind. The slight slope near Station 2, the rough patch of concrete near Station 3, the faint draft that always moved past Station 4 like a sigh. Behind me, somewhere, I heard a sound like fabric brushing concrete, soft, mobile. Not a knock, a presence moving without light. The tunnel, deprived of its guidance system, was still capable of pursuit. I kept walking. At the point where the corridor narrowed near Station 3, a voice spoke beside my ear with impossible closeness. "Lena," it whispered. My stomach lurched. I didn't turn. Turning would mean acknowledging direction, confirming location. I walked faster without running. Running would have made my breath loud. Loud would have been a reply. The voice tried again, shifting tone, almost kind. "You can hear me. Say it." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood just to have an excuse not to swallow. The exit was ahead. I knew it. I could smell the faint exhaust from outside, the city air seeping through the door seams. Something brushed my sleeve. Cold, damp, not a hand but not water either. A contact that felt exploratory. My entire body screamed to react, to jerk away, to curse, to speak. I did none of those things. I pushed the exit door open and stepped into early morning air like breaking the surface of a pool. Behind me in the dark tunnel, the voice spoke one last time. Not angry, not pleading, simply factual. "We'll try again." I shut the door and locked it, hands trembling so hard I almost dropped the key. And then I walked to my car without looking back. I sat in my car until 6 o'clock, engine off, hands still on the steering wheel as if I needed something solid to prove I hadn't dissolved. The sky over the waterfront lightened slowly, gray turning to pale blue. The city woke up in layers, a distant truck backing up with its beep, 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 gulls crying, a jogger on the sidewalk who glanced at my parked car and then away, polite in the way strangers are polite to other strangers' misery. I didn't call the police. What would I say? A door in a closed tunnel was open and a voice said my name and the lights behaved like predators. None of that was verifiable. The padlock was intact. The chain was neatly coiled. Anyone who went down there in daylight would see only concrete and damp and my own footprints, if the tunnel chose to keep them. And I didn't return to file an incident report. That was harder. Reporting was my profession. Not reporting felt like negligence. But reporting felt like feeding it, making it official, giving it the dignity of documentation. Instead, I drove home. In my apartment, I showered until the hot water ran cold. I scrubbed my arms where something had brushed me in the dark as if I could remove contact the way you remove grime. When I got out, I wrapped myself in a towel and stood in the bathroom doorway staring at the hallway beyond, waiting for the lights to turn on in sequence. They didn't. My building was not a tunnel. My hallway lights stayed on because someone had set them that way. I whispered my own name once just to hear what it sounded like in normal air, and the sound made me nauseous. For the next week, I didn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the brush against my sleeve again, the exploratory cold. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I stopped checking voicemails. I told myself I was done with the tunnel. The document bag sat on my kitchen table like a small bomb. I read the notes again in daylight. The handwriting looked less ominous in the sun, more human, more desperate, evidence of people trying to solve something with scraps of information and whatever time they had left. The thing I couldn't resolve was the timeline. The former project manager said containment began in 1961. The notes in the bag spanned multiple years, multiple shifts, multiple people who described the same progression: knocking, learning, speaking, adapting, and the change at 2:30. Someone's name was learned from a badge. Someone else's warning about standing still at Station 4. Someone's list of times. Someone's photocopied rule about swallowing. Which meant the door had been opened before. Which meant whatever process led to the door opening, the monitoring, the rotations, the schedule of a lone security worker at 2:30 had happened before, with different people, and containment had been re-established each time. How? By whom? The city? The private firm? The calm-voiced project manager who called from an unknown number and knew what I'd found? Bryce, compromised and forgetful, carrying a note card of evolving instructions like a living document? Or the tunnel itself, closing its own mouth when it had eaten enough? That thought was the one that kept me awake. Containment might not be something done to it. Containment might be something it allowed, and I replayed the night the door was open and realized something else. It hadn't tried to drag me down. It hadn't attacked. It hadn't demanded entry. It had asked for an acknowledgement. Say you can hear me. It wanted consent more than it wanted my body. That was, in a way, worse. Bodies end. Consent binds. 2 weeks after I quit, my agency called with another posting. Different site, different district, regular pay, day shift. I almost said yes immediately, eager to anchor myself in normal work. Then the recruiter mentioned casually that the Wron tunnel position was still listed as open. High pay, she said. Hard to keep someone down there, you know. People get spooked. I heard myself laugh, a single short sound that didn't match my face. Yeah, I said, spooked. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the document bag. For the first time since I'd taken it, I added nothing. I just stared at the blank space at the back where a new note could go. I thought about the next person who would take the job because someone always did. Rent always needed paying. Shame always needed distance. I thought about my own guilt, how it had made me susceptible to the performance behind the lower access door, how the thing had used my history without knowing details, shaping itself to fit. And I realized with a clarity that felt like cold water, that if the tunnel fed on behavior, then my leaving wasn't a victory. It was simply a pause in the experiment. The Wron tunnel posting went up again 3 weeks after I quit. Night security, Wron tunnel waterfront. 4-hour rotation upper section above market rate. Hired immediate start. Note, the previous occupant left without notice. Left without notice, I thought, was a phrase designed to make disappearance sound like poor manners. The new hire arrived on a Monday. I didn't meet her. I only know the details because I still had access to the scheduling app for a short time before my credentials fully deactivated. and because curiosity, again, made me look. Her name was Erin Caldwell, mid-20s. Prior experience, transit security, museum overnight watch, and a year of contract work at a hospital. The sort of resume that meant she'd seen enough strange human behavior to treat it as background noise. On her first night, she arrived early, checked her gear, and read the laminated rule sheet carefully at the entrance. I can picture her doing it because I did it too. Eyes scanning, lips moving slightly in silent reading. Standard language. Nothing unusual. The last rule, oddly worded, would register as bureaucratic filler. A pronoun error. Someone's attempt at humor. Erin would file it away and step inside. The tunnel would smell the same. Mineral water, old concrete. The motion sensors would wake the lights ahead of her, teaching her immediately that movement was how the tunnel acknowledged her existence. On her first rotation, she would reach monitoring station 2 and notice a ceiling panel that didn't sit flush. Just a few millimeters off, easy to miss unless you were the kind of person who noticed misalignment the way some people noticed lies. She would stand on the bench, lift the panel, and find a waterproof document bag tucked inside. Inside, several notes in multiple handwritings, warnings, times, contradictions. A living archive of trial and error. And at the back, behind the older papers, one new edition was written in careful block letters. It would begin, "Cover your badge. Read the last rule first. Do not answer the door. It would not be signed. Because names were currency. Because signatures were invitations. Because the last thing I wanted, more than sleep, more than absolution, was for the thing in the lower section to learn a new way to say thank you." I wrote that note on my kitchen table at 3 o'clock on a night when I couldn't stop hearing my name and the sound of my refrigerator cycling on. I used block letters because handwriting can be recognized, and recognition is another form of being known. I didn't include everything. I didn't mention the brush against my sleeve in the dark. I didn't mention the way the voice had said, "And we'll try again," as if this were a routine process. I didn't mention Dean, the staircase, the geometry of my hands. Some things belong only to the person they're designed to destroy. I sealed the note in the bag, drove to the waterfront at dawn, and slipped it back into the ceiling cavity near Station 2 the way you hide a confession inside a wall. Hoping someone will find it, hoping it will matter, knowing it might also be another layer in the tunnel's education. I tell myself that makes me better than the people who laminated rules out of order. Better than the city that calls containment decommissioning. Better than Bryce carrying his note card like scripture while forgetting what he'd already done. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I left that note because I needed the story to continue without me. And because if someone else walked those rotations, if someone else stood at that door at 2:30 and heard a child's voice perform fear perfectly, then maybe what happened in the tunnel wasn't about me. Maybe my guilt wasn't special. Maybe Dean's fall was just another staircase in a city full of staircases, and the tunnel was just another place where geometry and pressure and human weakness combined into something that could speak. That's what I tell myself anyway. Sometimes, late at night, when my apartment is quiet enough to hear pipes shifting behind the walls, I catch myself holding my breath, waiting to see if the darkness will answer in rhythm. And once, only once, I heard it, faint and patient, coming from the hallway outside my door. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 knocks. I didn't move, I didn't speak, I didn't acknowledge anything. But I did, without thinking, reach for the strip of black tape I keep in my kitchen drawer now. Because I still know the rules, and because somewhere under the city in a tunnel that never fully drains, something is still learning what it means when humans try to stay silent. It will try again.